Okay, now we're going to flip over to a couple of other interesting ones. First, we're going to talk about the PDMP and the recent changes to that, but also we've gotten some data now to see kind of what's happening since we've made these changes to the PDMP, which is kind of interesting. Also, people find this very interesting. You know, Colorado, we've been dealing with, of course, medical marijuana and now recreational. And the other states are really coming on board, and we'll talk about, you know, some of those as we go through this. But we're going to look at how Colorado compares with some of these other states, and believe me, it's all over the board. So, okay. So as far as the PDMP, what we wanted to do, we wanted to make a lot of changes to the PDMP to really make it much more usable and just a lot more controls around that. So one of the main things we wanted to do is to get more frequent data. So trying to change it from every 2 weeks to every day, which we did accomplish, and that's great. I think it's much more beneficial for pharmacists and for the providers at this point. The errors now, they have to be corrected and resubmitted within 30 calendar days, so they do have a little bit of time if something happens in those transmissions. So unsolicited reporting. So has anybody seen what we call the push reports, the push notices that have come out? Have anybody seen those at their pharmacies? You know, right now I think they're going to one person mainly for each of the large chains, and I know for Kaiser and everything. So not everybody sees those, but they are being sent out. And what happens is that the board has set a threshold for when a patient actually hits that number of pharmacies and that number of providers, then it automatically, the system kicks out a report. And that goes directly to both, so that both the pharmacy and the prescriber sees that. So this has been really good. It's just to make sure that we're getting that information out. It's for education. They're not forced to do anything with it at this time, you know, but it is to get it out there just for awareness. And what's happened is that over time, and this is what we were hoping would happen, is this is going to decrease because the physicians are getting it, so they're seeing their patients that are going to too many pharmacies and seeing too many providers. Same thing with pharmacies. So people are acting on that. You know, either the pharmacies are refusing to fill the prescriptions or they're talking to the patients that they know they're going to different providers, different pharmacies. Same thing with the physicians. So you can see it's really gone down. The first one that they sent out was of September last year. 667 of these went out. And the latest data that I got from the board was actually in March 15th, and it's 365, so it's already decreased half in that length of time. So I think we're going to just continue to see that. So it really is, it's good. Now, I think Mike touched on this. You know, I don't know how many pharmacists are really taking advantage of this, but I think there are quite a few providers. One of the things that we really got feedback on from the physicians, they just don't have time to do this. And, you know, they want somebody to be able to help them to pull that data so they have it accessible when the patients come in, so they know what they're dealing with. And they didn't have the opportunity to do that in most practices. So now they have the opportunity to do this. They can they can designate up to 3 individuals in their practice that can help them with that process. And the same thing with pharmacists. Pharmacists can do that with their technician, hopefully a very trusted technician, because as Mike said, you know, it's under your account. So, you know, you put up to 3 people under your account, and if they do something wrong, you are responsible. So you got to make sure, and you should be looking at what they're doing. See, that's the other thing. The person who has whose account they're under, you can go in and review what they're doing. So you can see if something's happening and something's going wrong. So they actually have to date, because this just started in January, they already have 203 delegate accounts. But they can't differentiate between whether, you know, they're pharmacist or provider doing that. But I'm sure this will grow as people get more comfortable. I think you've got to have a comfort level with it, with the people that you're doing. And also, pharmacists and licensed in other states can also now access the PDMP, which they couldn't before. So this is also good. So the mandatory registration, that was a big deal. You know, that everybody, all the prescribers with DEAs had to mandatory register, as did the pharmacists. All pharmacists, didn't matter if you're in any kind of dispensing role or not. So we all had to do it. So the latest statistic is that for providers, actually 92% of those have now registered with the PDMP. Not 100, but we're at 92. Hopefully that'll keep going up. And now with pharmacists, and this shows you exactly how many pharmacists we have, 7,569 pharmacists in Colorado as of January. And we actually have 7,291 active accounts. So we were at 96%. Like to be at 100. And so I'm not sure. I think that all the people who did not sign up got a letter originally from Dora. I'm not sure what they're going to do following up with that. If there's going to be some kind of a discipline or something, I have no idea. But at least we've got the majority of people that have signed up now. Federal-owned pharmacies, this was a big void. They didn't have the capability of transmitting their prescription data to the PDMP before they do now. And they pretty much jumped on this. The VA already, even before we got to January, they went ahead and are sending data from their VAs in Grand Junction, Denver, Pueblo, and Colorado Springs. And they're working on the other ones in our state as well, to try to get them to do it. And so the Indian Health Service is a good example of that. So we also, the legislation also called for the organization of a task force that would oversee the PDMP and work with the board for enhancements and any kind of efficiencies that we could have. So we already had the Colorado Consortium to Reduce Prescription Drug Abuse is a great group that's already doing a tremendous amount of work in Colorado right now. So it made a lot of sense just to go ahead and appoint them as that task force. So they did. And they'll be giving a report to the board by July 1st and making any recommendations that they think we should do. The only problem with that is that, we've already made some enhancements, and these were done last year, and I think people have been pretty happy with this. There are fewer clicks. That was the thing. It was so hard to use. Fewer clicks, easier download to get that information, the decrease in the time to obtain the information, so it's a lot quicker. You can reset your own password and username. You had to go through the doggone help desk before, and that was really time-consuming. And they've also included the morphine equivalent dosing information on that. But the problem is, we don't have the money for it. So we can't use any of the funds that are coming from the licensees, like the prescribers. They are part of their licensure. They raised their license fees a few years ago in order to pay for this. So we can't use that for any enhancements to the system, though. So we have to go through grants and things like that to get it. So even if we get grants, which hopefully we will, and we've been able to do that so far, our vendor is so far behind that even if we get a grant now, we're looking at not getting any of those enhancements in until the end of 2016. So we're kind of caught in that. But I think they made a huge difference with the enhancements they did. So the utilization has really increased for the PDMP, which is what we expected. That's what other states saw when they did that. So you can see even before it started, mandatory in January the 1st, it's still from July to December, it went up from 41 to 56%. But now look at April. In April, the utilization was 85%. It's great. And that's 3% even from the month before, even from March. So that's why I said kind of seeing how we're getting some good results from this. This is all good to see that it's good. So. Okay, now we're going to flip over to a couple of other interesting ones. First, we're going to talk about the PDMP and the recent changes to that, but also we've gotten some data now to see kind of what's happening since we've made these changes to the PDMP, which is kind of interesting. Also, people find this very interesting. Colorado, we've been dealing with, of course, medical marijuana and now recreational. And the other states are really coming on board, and we'll talk about, some of those as we go through this. But we're going to look at how Colorado compares with some of these other states, and believe me, it's all over the board. So as far as the PDMP, what we wanted to do, we wanted to make a lot of changes to the PDMP to really make it much more usable and just a lot more controls around that. So one of the main things we wanted to do is to get more frequent data. So trying to change it from every 2 weeks to every day, which we did accomplish, and that's great. I think it's much more beneficial for pharmacists and for the providers at this point. The errors now, they have to be corrected and resubmitted within 30 calendar days, so they do have a little bit of time if something happens in those transmissions. So unsolicited reporting. So has anybody seen what we call the push reports, the push notices that have come out? Have anybody seen those at their pharmacies? Right now I think they're going to one person mainly for each of the large chains, and I know for Kaiser and everything. So not everybody sees those, but they are being sent out. And what happens is that the board has set a threshold for when a patient actually hits that number of pharmacies and that number of providers, then it automatically, the system kicks out a report. And that goes directly to both, so that both the pharmacy and the prescriber sees that. So this has been really good. It's just to make sure that we're getting that information out. It's for education. They're not forced to do anything with it at this time, but it is to get it out there just for awareness. And what's happened is that over time, and this is what we were hoping would happen, is this is going to decrease because the physicians are getting it, so they're seeing their patients that are going to too many pharmacies and seeing too many providers. Same thing with pharmacies. So people are acting on that. Either the pharmacies are refusing to fill the prescriptions or they're talking to the patients that they know they're going to different providers, different pharmacies. Same thing with the physicians. So you can see it's really gone down. The first one that they sent out was when California first passed the Institute of Medicine jumped right on this. And so they actually came up with some guidelines, talking about also some of the concerns, psychological effects, how the psychological effects really kind of interfere with people really, having good medical effects from it. So, they talked about that. But also marijuana is effective in relieving some of the symptoms of those that we talked about before, but it's not really a cure for anything. It's really a palliative treatment, to be used with other medical treatments. And also, it doesn't really replace opiates, so it's used along with the opiates, specifically for pain, which you'll see is the majority of what patients are on. So, how the drug is produced, distributed, and provided to patients really varies from state to state, and we're going to give you some examples of that. Surprising to a lot of pharmacists, 2 states actually have pharmacists involved in the process now. So, Connecticut was the first one a couple of years ago, and then last year, Minnesota jumped on board. So we'll talk about each of those individual as we get to those. But now they're really concerned still about the DEA. Again, it's still Schedule 1, and there's really doesn't look like that's going to be changing anytime soon. They're just kind of turning the DEA and the Department of Justice are kind of turning their heads right now and just letting the states deal with their own issues. But the laws now that laws allow pharmacists to get involved in this, then they're expressing concerns about potential adverse health effects of marijuana as well. So again, the DEA can change this at any point in time, but they don't seem to be jumping on that. So hopefully this will also be, in the future, be helpful. So in 2013, as Washington and Colorado became the first states to legalize recreational marijuana, the Department of Justice, which the DEA is under, really decided they need to take a different stand. So, they're going to have to step back and let the states actually do their own oversight of everything that's going on. But they still have the right to, at any time and any point in time, if they don't think that the states are handling this, they can easily move in and start doing their raids and everything else. So, we still have that possibility out there, no matter what. So, but right now they're letting the states, they're just watching the states to see how they're managing it. So, generally the states that have medical marijuana usually have some form of patient registry. And I think this is really important moving ahead, too, as they're trying to gather the data that we need. As pharmacists are going to have to get involved in this. They're getting involved, and it's probably going to get even more in other states. So, but the patient registry provides some protection against arrest for those people. And in 2014, so we have 23 right now, plus D.C. and Guam, that specifically do have medical marijuana. But actually, 36 states last year considered bills for new medical marijuana laws. So, like I said, just like in Colorado, they kept bringing it back until we got 51% to pass it. And that's what's going to happen in all the states, that they're going to just keep bringing it back, and the public wants it. So it's going to happen. So the most common policy questions include how to regulate the recommendation, dispensing, and registration of these approved patients. So what happened in Colorado, unfortunately, is this next point. We just opened the floodgates. we just legalized it, and anybody in the world came into Colorado, as you know, set up dispensaries. So we had, people who weren't residents of Colorado. We had people who, had felony convictions, drug felony convictions, and they were running these dispensaries in Colorado. And that's what a lot of mistakes were made with states in the beginning. I think they're learning now because they've learned from us and other states that have had those problems. So again, Colorado has really been the leader in this, and all these other states are really watching us to see how we work through these problems. So that's a problem. So anyway, is it safe? Yeah, it's a good question, especially as pharmacists get more involved in this and other healthcare providers. So really, there's not a risk of death by overdose from the actual cannabis. So, that part, even if they take massive doses, that's not the problem. As you know, where people are dying is they're jumping out of windows and all different kinds of things. It's those kind of things, not the actual marijuana that's going to kill them. So, but there are adverse effects with using medical marijuana, and there's also interactions with other drugs. And we as pharmacists need to understand that because, even if we're not involved in the distribution or anything with marijuana, we do have a lot of people in the state of Colorado that are using it. So, we need to just be open to the fact that they feel like telling us that they are taking it. So it's sometimes we don't want to know that. We as pharmacists probably do need to know that, and other healthcare providers. So with some of the interacting drugs, though, barbiturates, CNS suppressants, tricyclic antidepressants, anticholinergics, and lithium. That's not an exhaustive, but these are the main ones. And it also, got to keep in mind, it can have adverse effects for patients with these kind of conditions. So psychiatric disturbances, cardiac respiratory disease, vertigo, cancer. A lot of times they're using it for cancer, the pain of cancer, pregnant or obese patients, and those on immunosuppressive drugs. So in Colorado, here's our history, which you guys are familiar with. We legalized the medical marijuana in 2000. It took a few years kind of before it actually got started, but it was in 2000. We use a medical marijuana registry, and it only costs $15 a year to get that card, pretty cheap, and you can renew it, pretty easy to renew. In Colorado, the department that actually oversees that is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So that's where it sits. With the card, the person can possess, acquire, grow, use, and transport the marijuana and the paraphernalia. The patient can possess 2 ounces of a usable form. Here in Colorado, it's actually seeds, leaves, and buds. So that's what we do. We do the dry. And up to 6 plants, and less than 3 of those could be mature. And pharmacies in Colorado cannot dispense marijuana. I don't think that's going to change. So it can be recommended by MD and used for certain conditions. So, those are listed here. They're the most common ones. And in Colorado, you can see 94% of our patients that are using medical marijuana is for pain. And the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment actually, all petitions, and there's been a lot of them, to submit different disease states for them to approve for use of medical marijuana, but they've turned down all of these. So asthma, anxiety, both bipolar, atherosclerosis, even diabetes is on there, hepatitis C, hypertension, MRSA, even opioid dependence they got on there, PTSD. So you can see all those have been turned down, but people continue to submit, requests for them to approve more conditions. And like I said, you'll see some of the states have actually approved it for up to 35 conditions. You have to have a bona fide physician-patient relationship, so they do have to do a medical history. They have to do a physical exam, and they have to offer follow-up care. They can't just see them once and never see them again. The physician has to have a valid, unrestricted Colorado license and a DEA registration. And this, when we first started in Colorado, this was not the case. Now, we've passed enough laws that we've got our arms around this. The physician cannot be paid by the dispensary, have ownership and interest in the dispensary, or examine a patient there. That wasn't the case. If you remember when you would pick up the Sunday paper, do you remember that? And you see the medical marijuana dispensaries said, "Come in. We've got our own physician. You can come in. You can, he'll recommend it for you. You can pick it up right here, and you can even use it on site." So those days are gone, thank goodness. So they can't do that. They can't have any relationship whatsoever with the dispensaries. And if they're, and you see more and more children that they're using, and I know some families have moved here with their children from Colorado to get the medical marijuana. But if the patient's under 21, you've got to get 2 MD approvals for it. So in Colorado too, we've also made the dispensaries have to be licensed both by the state and by the local government, which is a good thing. And you see that over and over again, where they're licensed by the state, but they're trying to go into municipalities that don't want them there. So the people there can vote not to have them there. So it's a good thing that there is a choice for towns and cities to not have to have medical marijuana dispensaries in their towns. 70% of the marijuana has to now be grown by the dispensary. That wasn't the case before either. They grew hardly any of it, and they contracted with outside people to do all the cultivation for them. So that's changed. And also the owners and employees must be residents of Colorado, not originally, and they cannot have drug-related felonies, thank goodness. So you can't consume it at the dispensary, and it cannot be used in public or in a manner to cause negligence. You see there's a lot of ads now about trying to let people know that you can't consume it in public and you can't drive and all that stuff. So we're getting a little bit smarter in Colorado now about it. And it has to be 100 feet from schools, just in Denver, though, not in all of Colorado. 100 feet from schools, child care centers, and other dispensaries. So Connecticut. So this was the first one to get pharmacists involved in it. So Connecticut, they passed 2 years ago. They passed the law 2 years ago, and now they're just not getting their first dispensaries opened in the state of Connecticut. What they do for the pharmacist is they have them get a certification from the Board of Pharmacy so they can practice in that area. So it's all, the Board of Pharmacy is involved in it in Connecticut. And there's been a lot of, they have now some of the first dispensaries, and they now have 4 manufacturers in the state. And that's really what you're seeing as far as the other states are getting smart, and they are making them have manufacturers that are overseen by the government. So, but there's criticism from the healthcare providers that we don't have the existing research, for really the pharmacists to be able to make these kind of decisions, and other healthcare providers. So again, the questions: what kind of training and guidelines do we need to be able to do that? And how do you determine appropriate dosing? Some of these states are saying that the pharmacists, need to be the ones that are doing the dosing for the patients. How do you do that? We're going to have to get some more data for that. Minnesota was the second state that actually got pharmacists involved, but actually the legislators last year in Minnesota actually worked with the Board of Pharmacy there, in the process. So they got a little more background and information as they moved their bill through the legislature. So they have 2 medical cannabis manufacturers that were approved, so they'll be manufacturing it by these entities, and they've okayed 8 distribution facilities that would be getting the drug from the manufacturers, and they'll be located across the state by next July. And they only allow the cannabis to be used in liquid, pill, and vaporized delivery methods that do not require use. So they're getting away totally from all we have in Colorado is dried leaves and smoking. So they're not doing that in the other states. So maybe Colorado can relearn and go back and look at it again. And also, they're collecting data too, which you'll see a lot of the states are. So they're going to be making sure that the providers that are working with these patients, they have to provide reports on all their patients back to the Department of Health. So they're going to be collecting all that data. So pharmacists can work with patients to determine the appropriate dose. I don't know how we do that yet. The language is not very detailed in the law. And the pharmacists actually work in Minnesota for the manufacturers. And each manufacturer has to have a pharmacist working for them. They have to hire a pharmacist there. And the Department of Health is working to gather all that information. New York, a little bit different. Like Minnesota, though, they're limiting the dosage delivery forms to not use smoked at all. They cannot. And the practitioners must complete a training course and register with the Department of Health. And there's only 5 registered organizations may manufacture and dispense marijuana, and each may only operate up to 4 dispensing facilities. So they're going to make sure they only have 20 of these facilities throughout the state. So they're, again, getting their arms around it. They can only get a 30-day supply, and they have to keep it in the original packaging. Maryland, Maryland, they went at it a different way. They decided they were going to give it to the academic centers, so their academic teaching facilities. And so none of them would buy. None of them wanted to do it. They had 5 designated and not one of them would do, so they have to go back and revisit this and amend the legislation, so now they're going to have the dispensaries and the cultivators to provide the drug directly to the patients. So Illinois also just started this. They're the ones that has up to 35 chronic conditions now that they've approved for medical marijuana. And they're going to be using the registry identification again to track the patients and again trying to gather the data on what really works, and so the healthcare providers can have more information on that. Patients are limited to a maximum of 2.5 ounce at a 14-day period, so they're really restricting that. When it's all done, they can purchase drugs from up to 60 dispensing centers across Illinois, but they're stopping it at 60, so they're topping it off at that. And this is interesting. The plant's grown in up to 22 cultivation centers. They have 22 police districts. So they're putting 1 in each police district. So again, they can watch what's happening with that, and they can have oversight from law. And patients cannot grow their own supplies. Not like in Colorado, you can. So what can pharmacists do in this? Again, there's concern. We don't have enough information. It's still a Schedule 1. So again, there's a lot of unanswered questions about how to determine the effective dose and how to involve our healthcare providers. So until these questions are answered, pharmacists really, and I think this is kind of what you walk away with today, just trying to make an environment for patients to feel comfortable at least mentioning to you as a pharmacist that they have medical marijuana. Probably not going to talk about recreational, but they may tell you they're on medical marijuana. So there's a big debate over our role in this. And at the APHA meeting in March, the House of Delegates, amazing debate on this. Very, very divided in the profession on this. So I was a delegate for Colorado for the House of Delegates, so I was there to see this. It was fascinating to watch. But they were trying to adopt several APHA policy statements around the medical marijuana and pharmacist role in this. And Mike also talked about another one of the statements that they came up with, the policy statements, was around comparing the drugs for execution. So that was another one. But this was interesting. So they did come up with the first one, which was they wanted to oppose pharmacists' involvement in furnishing cannabis and its various components for recreational use. Makes a lot of sense. We want to stay out of that. Then we got to this one, supporting pharmacists' participation in furnishing cannabis and its various components when scientific data supports the legitimate medical use of the products and delivery mechanisms. A lot of debate, and then it got voted down. So, so that we thought that was over. Well, then, one of the student representatives, he went to the mic and he said, we can't just sit under our rock and not even realize that all the states are it's becoming legal everywhere. There's no way that pharmacists are going to be able to stay out of this. So we have to take some kind of a policy statement. So they reopened it, and they voted on it, and they actually voted it. So it actually did get voted through, this particular statement. And after all that was over, there was a huge round of applause. People were just glad that, we could finally come to terms with, we can't just turn our heads away. So what's the debate over the pharmacist's role? We probably at some point will have a role. A couple states already do. But there's barriers, and these are the barriers. Lack of the scientific research on the safety and efficacy, and also the conflict that continues between federal and state.
I'm going to have to click on the kitchen.
All right. So there's a new pharmacy organization. You probably don't know about this one. Yeah, so this started last April. This was interesting. When I first got this, I sent out to my other management team, we're going, seriously? But there is a National Association of Cannabis Pharmacy now that was launched last April. And again, I think it's going to become probably more effective as more states begin to bring the pharmacist into it. So they want to support the pharmacists who are getting involved in this, specifically for these disease states that are, that have been proven to use medical marijuana effectively. They also want to provide a means to track the outcomes, again, trying to get the data so we know to come up with the dosing and everything that we need to be even remotely involved in this. And also they want to determine that safety and efficacy of the products that are coming out and see with all these manufacturers that they're setting up in all these other states, this particular group is going to be monitoring what's coming out of those as well. So it's interesting. Recreational marijuana, last thing I was going to talk about. Again, we and Washington started that whole ball running, and we're struggling with it, as you know. I mean, edibles are a big, big problem here. They're trying to work on now. But you can see voters in Oregon, Alaska, and D.C. last year also passed. So now they have recreational marijuana as well. So it's growing. We're not going to be able to get away from it, and this is what we have. The premise is to regulate it like alcohol, so they're trying to get their arms around how you do that, with blood levels and everything else. So, but going forward, what do we do with that? We really can't make marijuana regulation bulletproof. It's still Schedule 1. It's still illegal. So we still have that. If the feds want to come in anywhere, they can shut it down. There's a reason that Colorado's been left alone. They feel like Colorado has done a pretty good job of legislating for it and also, just keeping with our law enforcement, keeping it under control. And it's so again, it's recognized that we've done a pretty good job on that.